Greetings and salutations. Thank you for taking a look at the video. I hope you're doing well wherever you are in the world. This is a video in which I'm going to talk about my Linux journey, how we got to where we are today, talking about Linux on YouTube. And I'm going to start you way back with the first computer that I ever worked with. So this should be fun. Before we get into anything, I want to say thank you to everybody who has posted all of those great comments on the last few videos that I've done here. This video is a suggestion from a viewer. Somebody said they wanted to see this, and as a matter of fact, I have 2 more videos planned, which are suggestions from viewers. So thank you very much for that. Keep that coming. Like this video if you like what you see, and be sure and subscribe if you're not subscribed already. That helps the channel immensely, and it also helps get videos like this out in front of more people, so I really appreciate that. So we're going to begin at the beginning, and I'm going to take you back to when I was about 13 years old, and this is the first computer that I remember having anything to do with. A real computer, that is. I mean, back in the 70s and early 80s, we had Speak and Spell, and we had arcade games, and everybody knew about that. And then in the early 80s, they had these little miniature arcade games that you could buy. They were pretty awesome. LGR did a video about those not too long ago. And the 8-bit guy has done videos about those little mini consoles that you used to be able to buy. But the first real computer that I got to play with was an Apple II, and it was at school. I started the 8th grade, and in the library at my high school, back in those days, the 8th grade was actually part of your high school program. You know, you did 8th grade, and then you were a freshman in 9th grade and whatever. In the library, they had a couple of Apple II computers, and believe it or not, there wasn't a big rush, people trying to use them. So I spent a lot of time in the library, and I used to play with these computers quite a bit when I first started school there. And it was pretty basic what they had. I know they had a word processor of some sort, because I used to type all kinds of things into this and then print it for classes and things like that. But I think they also had a few games. They had Oregon Trail and some other stuff. So this was really my first introduction to a computer. And then I got a computer at home, and I'm trying to remember when this was. I think this would have been like the summer of '84 that I had this machine, and it's a Commodore 64 with a data set. My dad bought me this computer for Christmas or birthday or whatever, I don't remember. And they bought the computer, which was the computer and a power supply, and you could hook it into a television. That was all you had. And what they didn't understand, my parents didn't understand, was that you needed some way to store programs. So I didn't get the data set immediately. It took me a while to get that, because I had to convince them that the computer, other than playing games on cartridges, was kind of useless. So after I got the data set, I got a book that taught you how to program BASIC. And in that book were a lot of programs that you would type in. And I had some magazines as well that were full of programs. And that's how we did it back then. If you didn't go to a shop and buy the tape or the disc for the computer that stored the game or a cartridge, you'd get a book, and it would have the program, and you would type it in. And you'd never get it right the first time around. It wouldn't run. You'd have to go back and debug it. It was a big pain to do, but it was a great way to learn BASIC. Because by the time you did that 3 or 4 times, you learned BASIC. So I was typing in these little programs and saving them to cassettes to play with on my computer. I had a friend of mine who had a Commodore 64, and his dad was hipper than my dad because he'd gotten the actual disk drive and stuff like that. So what I would do is take my little data set over to his house and make copies of his programs from diskettes so I could play them on my computer. My fascination with the Commodore 64 did not last long. This was maybe over a summer, and then I just lost interest. It was a lot of work for not that much reward. And I'm not a game person. I never have been a big sit down and game in front of a computer person. I have played games through the years, but most of the time it's just not my bag. I'd rather do something else. So I kind of lost interest in the Commodore. It got packed away, and about 5 years ago, I was going through a storage closet in my mom's house, and I found the original Commodore box, and it had the Commodore 64, and it had the data set in it, and as far as I know, it's still there. And there was even a tape in the data set that I was using to store the programs that I was writing from the book. So I did not try to plug it in. I doubt very seriously whether it would work, the capacitors and the power supply going bad and all that stuff. But it's still sitting there as far as I know. Maybe I'll put that up on eBay someday. This is not the machine. This is a picture I found on the internet of a machine that looked exactly like mine. Sometime in the mid-'80s, it would have been 85 or 86, my brother bought a Tandy 1000 computer. He's 5 years older than I am. And when I started going to high school, he went off to college. But when he came home, he would bring this computer that he had, and the computer this was a real computer, by the way, the Tandy 1000. This is a picture of one later on. I think this is running like Windows 3. Back in those days, there was no Windows. It was running DOS 3.1. But he had a modem, so he could log into BBS, the bulletin board services. And he could also log into the computer at his college, which was mind-blowing because it was 600 miles away from where we lived. But he could do it over a phone line. He could dial up the college and find out what assignments he had from his professors over the summer and things like that. And it was just kind of amazing. It was also way over my head. I didn't quite understand how any of it worked. The only thing I ever did on his Tandy 1000 was to sit down and use Galaxy WordStar to type essays for school. That's about the extent of what I did with it. Or I would hang out with him sometimes, and we would check out things on bulletin boards and stuff like that. But it was a big deal because he had a phone line run into his room. He had a separate line that he was paying for. It was, like War Games or Ferris Bueller's Day Off, man. He was doing that stuff. But I was doing other things, and I wasn't terribly interested in computers as I went through high school and even into technical school. I just wasn't that into it. I was learning how to do radio. I started in fall of 1986 at WFOS in Chesapeake, which was a radio station owned by the Chesapeake Public Schools. And it was a full-time radio station. This wasn't a little high school station. It had real power, and they had a full schedule on the air all day. But you'll notice from this really bad picture that there's no computer in the studio. We didn't have that in those days. This was before computers took over in radio studios. We weren't doing any digital audio at that point. The technology had not progressed. And this picture here is probably from about 1988. And I do apologize for the quality of this picture. Plus the next one I'm going to show you, this is what I've got. I tried to up the contrast on this, but it just doesn't work. It makes it worse. This is as good as it gets. This is a picture that was scanned from newsprint. So this came out of a brochure the radio station used to publish. It was a program guide. So in the late 80s, this was what I was doing. I wasn't really into computers. I just wasn't on the front burner for me. And then in 1989, when I graduated school, my first real job was at WTAR and WLTY in Norfolk. And WTAR was the big CBS affiliate, one of those big full-service, old, ancient radio stations. Had the news at the top of the hour and had the full news department and news cars. It was amazing. It was a wonderful place to work. This is a picture of WTAR's main studio. It is the only picture that I have, and obviously it is a Polaroid that has been scanned. And this is not me. This is my friend George Lewis on the air at WTAR. This picture would have been from about 1990. And in the foreground, under the clock there that's up on the side of the rack, you'll see that there's a computer monitor. Well, that's actually a dumb terminal. And that terminal hooked into a mini frame computer, or a mini computer. And it was some sort of big Unix workstation. So my first taste of Linux was actually not Linux. It was Unix in 1989. And of course, Linux is a Unix work-alike operating system, so you can jump back and forth from one to the other and it feels exactly the same. But this was commercial Unix, and the operating system on that mainframe was a Unix called Basis. And I don't know a great deal about it. I remember getting a hold of the manual and reading the book and taking a look at how it worked. But on this machine, I was just a regular user like everybody else. In this picture, you see Mary Beth Landis sitting in front of a computer monitor. This is in the studios at WLTY. This is the main studio, which was the WTAR's FM station, WLTY. And Bruce Garraway is to the right. This was the morning show. Thank you, Bruce, for sending me this picture. I really appreciate it. Hope you don't mind I'm using it on the internet, but there it is. And this is a dumb terminal. All it is a keyboard and a screen and a little box that lets you talk to the big mainframe computer. That's what Unix was designed to do. Now, this Unix system that we had at WTAR and WLTY was there to process a lot of information which was coming in over the network. Now, this was before internet. We didn't have the internet per se, but we did have the UPI network coming in, their teletype service, and we had Associated Press, and WTAR was a CBS affiliate, so we had their teletype service as well. And this all went into this computer, and it was stored in the computer, and you could access all of that information, those news stories, and inside things from CBS about what was coming up on the network. They would announce that. And so there were many nights that I sat working on this computer, putting together little news stories or just watching the wires to see what's going on in the world. And they also had a word processor in there, and you could cut and paste and edit. It was green screen monitors, and it was all text. There was no graphics whatsoever on that machine. And they had 2 or 3 printers distributed throughout the building. And so you would write your story or edit your story, and then you would print what you needed, and you'd go rip it off the printer, and then you could read it on the air. That's how that worked. And that's as far as I got with that system. I was just a regular user. And I remember my username and password on that machine. My username was simply Joe. I was the only Joe in the building, so it wasn't Joe C or anything like that. It was just Joe. And my password was WOWO, WOWO, because at that time I was really a big fan of that radio station in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And so when they asked me what password I wanted, that's what I gave them. And in those days, they said, give me a 4-letter password. That's what you got. So I don't know whether the system restricted it to 4 letters or whether the sysadmin there just decided that that's the way to deal with it. But that's the way it worked. So I was at this radio station until 93, and then a friend of mine bought a radio station in a little town called Moneta, Virginia, which is near Smith Mountain Lake. And so I moved out there with him to help him get that station started. By 93, WTAR and WLTY had been sold. The original owners had owned the radio station for 60-something years at that point. And the new owners, while not being terrible, they were talking about moving the thing, and I was kind of done anyway. I wanted to go do something else. So I moved up to Moneta, and the station that I worked for, I didn't stay there long because they ran out of money and they couldn't pay me, and I had to eat. So I got another job at a radio station called WZBB. That's the call letters. And they are in, at that time, they were in Rocky Mount, Virginia. You never heard of Rocky Mount, Virginia, did you? That's the county seat of Franklin County, and that's also near Smith Mountain Lake. And I went to work for those guys, and they had an AM and an FM, WNLB AM and WZBB FM. And I actually started working on WNLB, and they had automation systems. It was the first radio station that I went into that had computers on the air. And it was a system called Systemation. I remember that. Quick Disk Systemation. And they called it Quick Disk because they stored audio on hard drive, which was unusual for automation systems up to that point. Automation had been around in radio stations for a long, long time. I mean, since the 1950s. And the computers that ran automation systems, usually what they did is they told tape machines what to do. You'd have these big arrays of tape machines, and essentially the automation system would be like fire 1, fire 2, fire 3. That would be it. But in the early 90s, they started to actually store audio on hard drive. And that was the first time that I'd ever seen that. The automation system that was on WZBB on the FM actually stored the commercials and the jingles and stuff on hard drive, and the music came from CD. But they were these big CD jukeboxes, the old Pioneer CD jukeboxes, if you remember those. And it ran those jukeboxes, and it would tell the machine what track to play. It was horrendous because it would get out of step, and it would play the wrong songs and all kinds of stuff. But I worked with that for several years, and then the last year I was at B99.9, they bought a system called Scott Studios, which was much better than Systemation and miles ahead. We'll talk more about Scott here in a moment. I don't have any pictures from WZBB that period of time, so I'm just staying here with Bruce and Mary Beth for the moment. But that was a big deal to work at that station, and I learned a great deal because one of the first things they told me when I went to work there, the fellow who owned it said, "We have these automation systems. You're going to have to learn how to use them." And I said, "Well, okay, give me the book," which is how I learned things. Give me the book. So they gave me the manuals, and I got the DOS books as well. Back in those days, Microsoft used to send these wonderful manuals with DOS, and you could, they had every command in there, what it did. So I learned a great deal. Also, at that radio station was the first time that I ever saw Windows. Was when Windows 3 was new. They had one of those machines, and I had time to play with it. And all I had to, I could hang out while I was on the air and play with the Windows computer. And so I just taught myself all kinds of stuff about computers. It was a wonderful learning experience. And I ended up going back to work for that radio station, and that will come up later in this video, so hang around. So after I left WZBB, I came back to Hampton Roads, where I grew up. And I left WZBB in 97, and it was because I was going through some personal issues at that time. And so I ended up just coming home, and I went to work for WFOG, and I worked there for a while, and I worked at a couple of other stations. And I got a job at Gateway Computer in Hampton. Now, at that time, Gateway had a factory in Hampton, Virginia, and on the top floor of the factory, they had customer support, and that was where I went to work, talking to people. And I had gained enough computer knowledge playing with computers and radio stations and working with automation systems at that point that I passed their test, and I got in as a what they called a TSP, Technical Support Professional. You got a certificate for that. And it was the first real formal training that I ever had specifically for computers, and I ate it up. I enjoyed it. The problem was I didn't stay to do the job. About the time that our training was over, which I enjoyed immensely, I found out that I really couldn't pull it off. I have an eye condition, and everything, of course, was on computer screens in front of you, and they wanted you to log everything that you did and all that stuff. And one day I just passed out and ended up going to the doctor, and the doctor said, "Well, you can't do that because you're straining your eyes too much." And I said, "Okay." So I went back to work in radio and worked in radio. I ended up, by the year 2000, I was working at a cluster of stations in Virginia Beach. I believe at this time they were owned by Max Media, or it could have been Sinclair. They changed hands a couple of times while I was there, and this is one of the studios that I worked in. This is WWDE, 101.3. It's licensed to Hampton, Virginia, but these studios were in Virginia Beach across the river. And they're still there. They're still in this exact room, although they have completely new equipment. It's all been gutted and redone. But this was new in 2000, and you'll see that there's a couple of computer screens here. The one that's up on the bridge above the console is the Scott Studios monitor. I had first started working with Scott Studios at WZBB, and I was very familiar with it by the time I got to work here. And that is a touch screen, boys and girls. Touch screens are not a new thing. They have been around for a long, long time. And next to that monitor up on top there for the Scott system, you'll see that there's a Mac. That's a Mac computer. It was running OS 9, I believe, and it's running a program called VoxPro. VoxPro is still around. You can still get it. It has a dedicated controller that allows you to basically use a computer as an audio recorder, record people off the phone and stuff like that, and play it back, and that's what it does. VoxPro is what it's called. And so that's what we were using at that time. The Scott Studio system was the first system that I ever used that all of the audio was contained on a hard drive. If you'll recall, when I was talking about Systemation, Systemation used CD jukeboxes to play the music. There wasn't enough hard drive space to do it. And by the way, the Systemation stored the audio as what they call ALAW. Horrible sounding stuff. By the time Scott came along, they were using aptX 4:1, and it sounded great. And so they put all of the music and the jingles and everything on the computer, and you would control it from there. They had a big server, it was an audio server, and they had the production room had the production end of the software where you would create stuff and load it into the system. This was a really great system. It's still to this day one of the best systems that I've ever worked with. At this point, you're probably saying, where's the Linux? It's coming. Don't worry about it. We haven't got there yet. We're looking at the DOS and Windows days, okay? So, moving on here, I actually left radio for a while, starting in 2001. Stayed home when my daughter was born because her mother, I guess that's the best way to put it, we're not together at this point, she had a really nice job. And I decided to stay home and become house husband for a while. So I wrote a lot of freelance articles about radio and really got into social media and learned more about computers. That was the days of Windows XP. Then I went to work for a company, First Media Radio, their cluster of radio stations in Roanoke Rapids, North Carolina. They had 8 radio stations and a television station, and my title there was Operations Manager. I was in charge of the operation of all of those stations. I was the next guy under the general manager. The joke was we had a great big building, and the one side was all business offices, and then there was the Coke machine, and on the other side of the Coke machine was all studios and engineering and that sort of thing, right? And so the joke was that I was in charge of everything on this side of the Coke machine, and the general manager was in charge of everything on the other side. And I worked there for a while. I wasn't there terribly long. I think I was there about a year or two. While I was there, we did a lot of improvements, and we used an automation system called MediaTouch. And this is a picture of MediaTouch running in our radio stations in Ahoskie, North Carolina. This would be WDLZ, and this was the main studio. That board there is an LPB Signature 2, which is absolutely positively one of my favorite radio consoles ever built. It's just very cool to me. And I don't think this board is still on the air. If it is, it's about 35 years old at this point. So above that, you'll see the 3 monitors. The one all the way to the left is Adobe Audition, and then you have the actual MediaTouch system running there, and then you have MediaTouch Production running on the far right monitor. So this is all happening in the same studio. And this would have all been running on Windows XP. This was when XP was still a thing. So this would have been, this picture comes from about 2000. Well, this is a little bit later, I think. This picture was taken a little later after I had left there. So I'm not really sure. But I worked there 2005 to 2007. So there you go. And I went on to become another operations manager for another company, Vox Media. They had a couple of stations in Harrisonburg, Virginia, WBOP and WSIG. And here is my friend Fritz Horsk. He is sitting at the board at WSIG, and behind him you will see the computer monitor running the automation system. They had an automation system called Maestro, and it was an absolute nightmare. Before I came to work there, somebody had the bright idea of putting VNC on it so they could log into it from home, and it was unsecured. And this system got hacked, and it never worked right. And there was just a series of failures, and they didn't have any backups. And so I spent about a year working at this place, rebuilding that system and getting it to where it ran properly. And then just about then, they fired me. They decided that they were going to do a big management restructuring, and so I got the axe, and so did the general manager. But Fritz worked there for a long time after that, and we talked off and on. We've kind of lost touch these days, but really nice guy, and one of the nicest people that I worked with when I was there. He'd come out of Delaware, so he'd had a great deal of experience in television and radio, and we just got along really, really well. So this will bring us up to 2008, and that's when my radio career stopped for a long, long, long time. 2008 happened. When I left WBOP and WSIG, when I was let go, we started an insurance agency. Me and the lady I was with at that time. And then the big crash happened, and we had to close the agency because we weren't making any money. And so I had a lot of time on my hands, and I started playing around on YouTube. I had discovered YouTube, and the first videos that I posted were about cassette decks and things like that. This is a picture of my friend Laurent, and he is watching me on his laptop computer on YouTube. He sent me this picture. It's pretty cool. The first things that I posted on this channel were about audio. There were a few things about computers, but mainly about Windows. And then I started playing around with Linux. When I was working at Gateway Computer, when I was going through my training, that's when I really first heard about Linux. I had heard the word Linux. I didn't know what it was. They explained it to me when I worked there, and in the computer lab at Gateway Computer, they had one of their machines running on Linux, which would have been Open Caldera at that time. And I think it had KDE-1 for the desktops. This is very early days of desktop Linux, and that would have been back in 1999. Well, we are now at 2008, and I discovered this thing called Ubuntu, and I downloaded it, and I did a video about it on YouTube. I dual-booted my computers for a little while with it, and then went back to Windows, because I got frustrated because I didn't know enough about it. But I kept playing with it. I kept poking at it. And I would do an occasional video about Linux on YouTube, but not a great deal. I got into a thing called Interface with another friend of mine, another media friend, a fellow I went to school with named Scott, and we used to do one of the very early podcasts, video podcasts, called Interface. Nobody remembers it. There is an Interface YouTube channel. It exists. I think all of those old podcasts are up there. It's horrible. But we were a little bit ahead of our time because people were not consuming media that way at that time. So anyway, that went on. That's I played around with that for a long, long time. I started doing Linux videos here and there, and people started liking it. And then in 2014 was about the time that I stopped using Windows and started using Linux full time. So this is what was then my main computer, a screenshot, and I was running Windows 7 at that point, and this was the 2nd of July 2014. So it was not too long after that this machine became full-time Linux. And at that time, on that machine, I was experimenting with a lot of different distributions. So this is Ubuntu running in the background with the Unity desktop all the way in the back. We have Linux Mint there. And then in the front is a distribution that no longer exists called Ubuntu GNOME. Ubuntu GNOME at that time was a straight GNOME desktop running on Ubuntu. Got to remember that Ubuntu distributed with Unity by default. So that's where this picture is from. And so this hard drive died, and I ended up losing my Windows 7 installation. And I put another hard drive in the computer and loaded Ubuntu 14.04, and that was it. I haven't looked back ever since. Now, up to this point, I did have one machine that was running Linux starting in 2012, and that was a laptop. And that laptop was running Ubuntu 12.04, and it worked. It did everything I needed it to do. But I still had this Windows 7 machine. I wasn't completely ready to let go. So in 2014 was when I said, okay, I'm done with Windows, and I really got into Linux. And the next thing that happened after that was I had posted a couple of videos about switching to Linux and talking about it, and they took off on YouTube. And the more Linux content that I put up, the more people liked it. So I got an idea. I was like, well, maybe there is I could create a company where I could help people get started with Linux. And so that's where EzeeLinux came from. You guys may remember EzeeLinux if you've been around the channel. And the original idea was it was a website, and I would help people get Linux installed on their computers and set them up. And I was a one-man crusade trying to install Linux for everybody. The YouTube channel kept getting bigger and bigger, and EzeeLinux morphed into like an online community where we had a Facebook page. People could talk there. I had a forum at one point, like a real forum, which I hosted myself. You could join that forum, and you could talk back and forth with people there. And we did a lot of things with EzeeLinux, like this is one of the things that I posted on social media. Something big is coming on EzeeLinux, because this was when we opened our own forum. This was the big deal, because that was, at the time, that was a big deal. Now, people don't really get into that sort of thing these days, which we'll get more into that as we move on. But at that time, people were really consuming a lot of blog-type content. A fellow named Matt Hartley started a web page about the time that I started EzeeLinux. He started a web page called Freedom Penguin, which was another community hub sort of thing where people would contribute written stories and videos and things like that. And I contributed a lot of content to Freedom Penguin. I wrote a lot of stories, and that was pretty good for a while. EzeeLinux was taking off. The videos were big. The channel was big. Everything was cool. And then about 2017, it started to go downhill a little bit. It was people started to kind of pull back from social media because of 2016. There was a lot of vitriol, a lot of flaming, a lot of hate going on the internet, and especially in the Linux community. I mean, it's always drama in the Linux community anyway, but this was really ramped up. And people sort of drew back away from that sort of content. So people like me that were providing the content like that, we saw a real downturn in interest and in engagement and people interacting. This used to be on the main page at EzeeLinux. Linux is a community, not a product. You can use it for free, but it's not a free ride. It would not be what it is today without conscientious users who contribute to the projects and buy from companies that embrace Linux, support Linux. And that was really the message of EzeeLinux was, hey, welcome to the community. This is a journey. You're here to learn, contribute, have fun, that sort of thing. So that's what we did. And this is a thumbnail from one of the videos that I posted. I don't know whether this is still up on the channel or not, the video. I didn't go look. But Ubuntu Unity Forever. This is when Ubuntu announced that they were no longer going to be supporting the Unity desktop and switched to distributing GNOME. And so this was my response to that. A little bit tongue-in-cheek, but some people took it seriously, and this was a big video on the channel there for a while. One of the things that we did during the EzeeLinux time was Mr. Desktop and Mr. Server. These videos were very popular, and this was me talking with Jeremy O'Connell from CyberWeb Solutions. Jeremy is still out there doing his thing. He was a collaborator in the EzeeLinux project. He was my engineer. He helped me to build the web page. He helped me to maintain all the infrastructure. He wrote all the middleware necessary to make that work. We had a lot of custom things that we did with WordPress. He is one of the smartest people that I think I've ever talked to. You know, there is a joke that goes around. The internet, only about 10 people really know how it works. Jeremy is one of them. Okay, he's one of those rare people who really understands it, and he's still very active in the community today. So thank you, Jeremy, for all the contributions you've made to EzeeLinux through the years. He left the country. He now lives overseas and lives in Thailand. So we don't talk as much because there is a 12-hour difference. We occasionally email back and forth. But he's very happy these days doing his thing in Thailand. So that brings us up to about 2018. The YouTube channel was starting to lag a little bit. The EzeeLinux thing was it was winding down, and right about that time, a fellow that I had worked with at WZBB, remember that, we talked about it way back, Eric Turner, bought the radio station from the people that we had worked for way back in the 90s. And this was 2018. I was there the day that the radio station changed hands. They had a big on-air celebration. It was an anniversary party for the radio station, and I was asked to come up and be a part of that. So I was on the air in the morning talking to people, and we were having a chat in the studio, and then middays rolled around, and Eric grabbed me and he said, "You're on the air." I said, "What?" And I hadn't been on the radio since WSIG 11 years earlier. You got to remember, I had left WSIG in, actually late 2007. And so I had been on the air for 11 years. And so this was the first time that I had been on the air after 11 years, and this was that day. I am actually talking on the radio in this picture. A little bit later on, after he'd gotten into the radio station, we got the idea that I could do a show on the air at WZBB every night, because when I had worked there way back in the 90s, I had done the night show, and in those days, the night show was incredibly successful on that radio station. We had really, really high ratings, and it was a big deal. So we were trying to recapture a little bit of that magic. But my kids were in school. They were enrolled here in Hampton Roads in Portsmouth, and I was like, I'm not moving back up there. So what we came up with was a way for me to do my show from here. The radio station is 250 miles away in Franklin County. Well, actually now the radio station is... The studios for the radio station actually sit on the county line between Franklin and Henry County, because it serves both of those counties. And if you're in the front of the radio, you walk in the front lobby, you're in Franklin County. If you go back around the corner to the production room, you go walk in the back of the building, you're in Henry County. Or maybe it's the other way around. You go in and that's right. You go in the front door and you're in Henry County, and then you're in Franklin County in the back of the building. So couldn't get more centrally located if you're going to serve the counties. Anyway, so what I would do is I would record my show using the software that you see in front of you, and the system they use is called Wide Orbit. Wide Orbit is a combination of Scott Studios and Maestro. Remember, we've already talked about those two. They were bought by Google, and they still run this automation system. They still sell it, and it is. They took all the good things out of Maestro. Believe it or not, there was a couple. And they took all the good things from Scott Studios and put it together. So this was how I did my show from home. And I did that show on the radio for about 6 years. Just recently, I left the radio station because I just was completely burned out. There's a video about that I posted very shortly after I left. If you want to take a look at it, you can. It's back here on the channel, but it states all the reasons. So this was what I did every day for about 5 years. I did the show, and the original idea was that I was going to record the show in the morning, have lunch, and then work on YouTube stuff in the afternoon. And it just didn't work out that way because as time went by, I started to have more and more responsibilities, doing things for the radio station. Even though I was 250 miles away, I was maintaining the library. I put in all the music at WZBB from fresh sources, either super clean high-res download files or from my own personal collection on CD. So I completely revamped the music library, and that took 3-4 years to do. So this is what the log would look like at WZBB for a typical hour. This is when we were doing a special time machine. We were doing a special weekend thing where we were playing a bunch of oldies, and so that's why you see that we start out with Country Club, My Favorite Memory from Merle Haggard, When Will I Be Loved from Linda Ronstadt, Teach Your Children. That was a lot of fun. That was a thing we did on the weekend called The Time Machine. And yes, I did steal that from WNBC in New York. And Dale Parsons, who was the program director at WNBC in New York when they started The Time Machine, is a friend of mine. So he knows, and he's okay with it. But we did it at WZBB for a while, too. So thank you, Dale, for the idea. People who grew up in the New York area will remember back in the 80s, the Time Machine was a big deal on WNBC in New York. That was like the #1 rated radio show on the weekend. They would play oldies. So anyway. So this is what the studios look like now at WZBB. And this is the board that was there that you saw me in the last that picture when I was sitting at. This is the console that we installed in 1995. This was on the air for about 25 years. Never got turned off, and they pulled it out and they put this new console in there. And this new one is a Wheatstone, and there are no analog connections. WZBB today is an entirely digital radio station. And they actually just bought another radio station, WITI, and that will be all digital too, very quickly. And what that means is that there are no like audio cables connecting the console. It's all Cat6 cables. All of this happens through a computer network, and so it's all digital audio. It's called audio over IP, and that's how it's done these days. And it sounds absolutely wonderful. And you're probably saying, well, what about the microphones there? Well, the microphones are plugged into these rack-mounted units that they have DACs in them that convert analog to digital. And so you set the microphone up, and that rack-mounted unit has mic processing on it and all of the preamplifiers and everything you need to run a microphone, and compression and gates and whatnot. And you set all that up, and then that is immediately converted to digital, and it just comes up somewhere on the board there. And so when you are controlling things from that board, you're actually telling a computer called an audio engine what to do with the sound sources that are hooked to it. Very, very cool indeed. And one of the great things about doing audio over IP is the fact that you can do it remotely. Like at B99.9, they actually do football games, like local sports, like a remote broadcast. They'll go out and they don't have anybody sitting at the station. They don't need it. You actually log into the system and you take control of the board from wherever you are over the internet. It is amazing. So when they do their sports, the guys go out and just log into the system from wherever they are. They carry their own power supplies, like a Jackery, like a portable power supply, so they don't have to plug into anything. And they use the LTE network to get a connection over the the internet to the radio station, and it works beautifully. So all the audio and everything from where they are comes from there. And it sounds wonderful on the air. So very cool. This is the latest technology in radio, And there's the old board once again, getting ready to go out wherever old boards go. The capacitors and things in this board were ready to go. This thing had to get off the air. It had served the station well, let me tell you. And that's an old, that's a Wheatstone as well. It's an Audio Arts console. So I've been working at B99.9 for 6 years. Here's some of the things we did. The Halloween Haunted Radio Special tonight at 9 p.m. on B99.9. This is, of course, the Halloween special. We ran this. I did this for like the last 3 or 4 years in a row, and it's just all of the Halloween tunes that you can think of. You know, Somebody's Watching Me by Rockwell and Thriller by Michael Jackson. We didn't, it's a country radio station, but for Halloween we played whatever, So that was the kind of fun we did. I also had a feature that ran for many years called the Mini Concert, where at 9 o'clock I would feature an artist and we'd play a half hour or so of their music. And if it was somebody really big like Reba McEntire or George Strait, we might do this over 2 or 3 nights and play all their hits and talk about them. So this was an idea that I actually stole from a fellow named Dan Knight, who worked at WOWO in Fort Wayne, Indiana back in the early 90s. I had mentioned them earlier. And I used to listen to that station at night. We used to be able to get it at night really well here in Hampton Roads, Norfolk, Virginia Beach area. And anyway, he used to do the same thing. He'd play 3 or 4 songs from an artist and talk a little bit about them. So I said, let me do that on B99.9. So did that for many years. And some of the other crazy crap that we came up with was Larry the Seal playing ukulele. My daughter got a ukulele for her birthday or something like that. And I was tuning it up for her because she didn't know how. And I'm not a great musician by any stretch of the imagination. Back when, before I started radio school, I used to take piano and violin and voice lessons and stuff. I never got really good at it, but I do know enough to be able to strum a few chords on this ukulele. So I was doing that and singing Over the Rainbow on the radio, and it turned into a joke, and it was Larry the Seal playing ukulele. Yeah, I know. B99.9 is not a normal radio station, boys and girls. So anyway, now that I'm done with radio, what is next? Well, we have 130,000 subscribers on this YouTube channel, and there is a renewed interest in Linux, so you're going to see a lot more Linux content here. We have rededicated ourselves here on the Joe Collins YouTube channel to bringing you Linux-related content. Back in the height of EzeeLinux, I used to do a lot of different things. We had, as I said, a website, we had a forum, we had a Facebook page. All of that is gone now, but I am working on plans to put up another web page so that there will be a place where you can go to get scripts that I talk about here on the videos. I used to have a GitHub account, but I don't want to fool around with GitHub anymore because of Microsoft owning them, and I'm not really into that whole scene anyway. But I'm working on a place where you can go and grab those sorts of things. So we're rededicating ourselves to doing Linux-related content again here on YouTube and teaching a whole new generation how to use Linux because, as I had said, 2017, 2018, I think people were pulling away in the community. They kind of pulled back a little bit. Well, now that seems to be coming back around. We have a whole new group of people who are tired of putting up with the walled gardens and Microsoft telling them what they can and can't run on their hardware and not allowing them to have a local account and the constant privacy breach, which is running just about any commercial operating system. So I see the future of Linux is being very bright at this point, and so we're going to move forward and post videos about Linux. So thank you to everybody who has watched through the years. Some of you guys have been around since the beginning, so thank you. That is most appreciated. And we're going into like a phase 2 here. Now that I'm not doing radio, I will have more time to devote here to the channel, and I'm looking forward to it. So the next video is going to probably be about installing Ubuntu and creating your own home partition and how to do that. Somebody has requested that I post a specific video about that, so I'll be working on that for this weekend. So we should be doing that again very soon. As always, your comments, your suggestions, very much appreciated. Not many people watch these kind of videos. I know that. If you are one of those that did and you're all the way down here toward the end, you are a very special person. I love you. Thank you. We'll do it again soon.